Do you guys want to hear some bullshit?
Now this is a story all about
The worst book I've ever read in my fucking life. The book I'm going to be talking about today is The Door into Summer by Robert A. Heinlein. First I want to tell you how I got this book, because the story of how I got this book is actually very nice. I got it as a Christmas present from my friend because at the time I was writing a story about time travel. And this is supposed to be a really great book on time travel, so we thought, hey, maybe she'd enjoy this, maybe it will be useful to her. Which was really nice, and I was really thankful, and then I read it, and it's fucking garbage. So the story starts with our protagonist Dan, mid-bender, lamenting his fate. Dan is an engineer who, until very recently, co-owned a company that made robots that do housework. Because this book is set in the crazy future of 1970. Anyway, Dan's at a bar with his only friend, a cat named Petronius the Arbiter. But he doesn't call the cat that, he calls the cat Pete. Just name your cat Pete, you pretentious wanker. So Dan lost his company because his partner Miles and their secretary / Dan's fiancée Belle screwed him out of the company. They wanted to sell, Dan didn't want to sell, they took a vote and ended up firing Dan and kicking him out of the company. So at some point during his drunken haste, Dan decides to take the cold sleep. The cold sleep is just where they put you under for however many years and wake you up in the future, like in Futurama. Dan figures the only way to move on from this is to wake up in a time when Belle doesn't exist, long after she's dead. But Dan doesn't have enough money to be put under for that long, so he ends up settling for just 30 years, because it wasn't necessary to sleep until Belle was dead. It was enough, more than enough, and just fitting revenge on a female to be young when she was old. Just enough younger to rub her nose in it. Say about 30 years. Dan's a classy guy. The only downside to taking the cold sleep is that Dan won't be able to see Ricky anymore. Ricky is Miles's 10-year-old stepdaughter. Ricky and Dan get along. I mention this now because it's relevant later. Dan goes to the cold sleep place and arranges to be put under the next morning. Side note, at the cold sleep place he describes the secretary, a real human woman, as follows. The receptionist at the mutual assurance company was a fine example of the beauty of functional design. In spite of being streamlined for about match 4, she displayed frontal-mounted radar housings and everything else needed for her basic mission. I think frontal-mounted radar housings is the weirdest euphemism I've ever heard for breasts. Frontal-mounted radar housings. Hang on. I think this guy wants to fuck a submarine. The doctor at the cold sleep place tells Dan to sober up, because he's a good doctor who doesn't let people make life decisions while they're hammered. Dan sobers up and decides he doesn't want to take the cold sleep. Shocker. Instead, he decides to confront Miles. Before going to see Miles, he arranges to have the stock he still has in the company transferred to Ricky when she turns 21. Then he goes to Miles's house, and Belle is there. Belle and Miles are married, that traitorous slut. Belle injects Dan with a plot device. I mean, zombie drug. That means he can't move or speak or do anything unless she tells him to. But he can still see what's happening around him. Belle finds the paperwork for the cold sleep in Dan's bag and thinks, perfect, he can fuck off to the future where he won't spoil our plans. We'll make sure he takes it tomorrow morning. Belle and Miles have a fight with Pete the cat. Dan is very disappointed that he can't watch. The next day, Belle takes Dan to the cold sleep place. They put him under, and then he wakes up 30 years later in the year 2000! When he wakes up, Dan has no money because the investments he made got screwed up. The book spends a very long time explaining this. What he does have when he wakes up is a message from someone called Mrs. Schultz. Dan does not listen to this message and promptly forgets about it because he's an idiot. When he gets out of the cold sleep center, Dan has 3 goals. 1. Catch up on engineering tech stuff. 2. Find Belle and Miles
and destroy them.
3. Find Ricky and possibly marry her. What's that? Marry the girl he only ever knew as a child? But that's creepy as fuck. Yeah, it is. I made a note to track down Ricky first thing. Top priority. She was all that was left to me of the world I had known, and she loomed very large in my mind. Dear little Ricky. If she had been 10 years older, I never would have looked at Belle and wouldn't have got my fingers burned. Ew. Let's see, how old would she be now? 40? No, 41. It was hard to think of Ricki as 41. Still, that wouldn't be old in a woman these days. Or even those days. From 40 feet you frequently couldn't tell 41 from 18. Ew. If she was rich, I'd let her buy me a drink, and we would drink to Pete's dear, departed, funny little soul. And if something had slipped and she was poor in spite of the stock I had assigned her, then by damn I'd marry her. Yes, I would. It didn't matter that she was 10 years or so older than I was.
I am disgusted.
So Dan gets a job at his old company, Hired Girl Inc., which was named after his first invention, the hired girl, which, honestly, I'm not even going to touch on, but holy shit. He's not much of an engineer at the moment, but they agree to hire him so he can do promo shit, and he agrees to do promo shit as long as they let him fuck around with engineering and try and catch up. So about 6 months after being woken up from the cold sleep, Dan gets a phone call from someone called Mrs. Schultz. You know, the person who left him a message when he woke up, the message that he ignored because fuck that shit. And guess who it is? It's Belle, one of the 3 people he was determined to find. So he arranges to meet her. He meets up with Belle and she's disgusting. She's fat, shrill, and kittenish, whatever the fuck that means. She's not rich, so clearly something in her plans has gone wrong. Dan interrogates her about this and finds out that Miles died 2 years after he went under, and Ricki went to live with her grandmother. But Belle doesn't remember the grandmother's name, so this information is fucking useless. He also finds out that his invention, which they were trying to sell, was actually stolen on the night he confronted them. Dan goes back to work and starts an investigation into patents. He's noticed products on the market that are very similar to things he had thought of but hadn't got around to putting patents on. Eventually he gets a hold of some of the original patents for these inventions and finds they were created by someone called D.B. Davis. But that's his name! Unless it's not, because Davis is a very common name. Dan talks about this with his new drinking buddy Chuck. Chuck tells him not to worry about it because there's lots of people named D.B. Davis. So they don't. They keep drinking and talking. We talked of other things, particularly women. Chuck had a theory that women were closely related to machinery, both utterly unpredictable by logic. Fuck. Then, literally out of nowhere, Dan's all like, gee, if time travel were real, I'd go back and investigate all this. But it is real. What? Oh no, I've said too much! Then Chuck explains how he was involved in a top-secret project about time travel, but it's classified and he can't tell anyone. But he can tell Dan, and does. I'd like to take a moment to point out that at this point we're about 75% of the way through the book, and we've only just mentioned time travel. Also, Heinlein spends an absurd amount of time talking about stock transfers and how investments work when you put money aside to go into cold sleep. But time travel? Fuck that! Just drop that shit in conversation and get on with the plot. Anyway, after that, Dan tracks down the time travel dude and convinces him to send him back 30 years. Convinces him by just annoying the shit out of him. He's all like, I bet you can't do it, you're full of shit, old man. And eventually the old man gets mad enough to press the button and send Dan back in time. At which point Dan immediately regrets it. Even as he stabbed at the button, I tried to shout at him not to do it, but it was too late. I was already falling. What the fuck even is your objective, buddy? Anyway, when he gets to the past, he immediately sets about investigating the people who screwed him over. Psych! No he doesn't! He spends a year inventing shit so he can rake in that sweet, sweet royalty money. Priorities! Patent law! Also, he befriends some nudists, John and Jenny, but I'm not going to go into them because they're literally just a plot device that lets him get things done more easily. After sorting out his inventions, he turns things over to John, a lawyer, conveniently. He asks John to set the company up the way he saw it in the future. You know, because surrendering control of his company worked out so well the first time. But damn it, there's no time to do things myself! I've got a little girl to seduce!
Oh, you nasty.
Anyway, Dan fucks off to deal with Miles and Belle. While they're screwing over past him, Dan steals his own invention and destroys it so they can never make money off of it. He also gets his cat back. Then he goes to visit Ricki at the camp she's staying at, to give her her stock in person and to let her know that he's going to take the cold sleep. Ricki's upset. She says that Dan doesn't like her anymore because if he did, he wouldn't take the cold sleep. Why can't he just stay with her and her grandmother? Dan respects Ricki too much to lie to her, but also not enough to explain the situation. So he just says, Ricky, I gotta. But if you want to see me in the future, just take the cold sleep when you turn 21. Make sure you wake up on this date, and I'll be there waiting for you. If I do, will you marry me? My ears roared and the lights flickered, but I answered steadily and much louder than she had spoken. Yes, Ricky, that's what I want. That's why I'm doing this.
It's time to stop!
So Dan goes back to the future and finds his new company all set up. He goes to the cold sleep facility where Ricky is and finds out she's left instructions to not be woken up at all until he shows up. Because I guess in the 10 years between him leaving and her turning 21, she didn't find anything to make her life about. Her life is just about being with him. That's fucking sad. So the 30-year-old man and the 21-year-old woman get married and live happily ever after, and it's not weird at all, the end. So some thoughts about this book, aside from the obvious creep factor. Disgusting! It's just shitty. It's just shitty. I don't know if this quite came across in my synopsis, but it spends a lot of time talking about legal technicalities. You know, like all good science fiction. 90% of the book felt like the setup to the plot. But it wasn't the setup, it was the plot. It was just fucking boring. I will say this book has one redeeming quality, and that is that I always like reading books about the future written in the past, because it's just fun to see what sort of tech they think we're gonna have. Like this book, he assumes in 2001 Los Angeles will have sorted out its smog problem, but they don't have internet or mobile phones. And that's just always entertaining. Now, I know a lot of people can overlook a little bit of casual sexism in their old science fiction because, oh, it was a different time back then. And sure, whatever. I mean, this book was written in the 50s. But were they cool with pedophilia in the 50s? I feel like they weren't. I mean, I wasn't there, but I feel like they weren't. Anyway, none of that even matters because it's 2018 and this book is bad. It's a bad book, it's garbage, and I need to give it a proper send-off. Okay, it's time to destroy this evil book so it can't poison anyone else. I just want to preface this by saying that I love books and I think everyone should read and that books are great, but this one needs to die. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. If you did, like and subscribe. Do you think it's suffered enough? Die. 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 Oh my god, it's really burning now, holy shit. It will never hurt anyone again.